One thing a moral realist is a person who believes there are better and worse answers to moral questions arrived at through this kind of what you might call the physics of morality, right? The law-given nature of human discourse. So if you look at the ancient Greek, Jewish, Greek, and Roman world, and then beyond that, the Islamic world, and you look at most streams in Eastern mysticism, all of them believe that the human mind, at its best, in some ways is a reflection or refraction of the divine mind. So part of what revelation for the rabbis means is the ability to absorb the da'at of the divine mind. It's a long-winded way of saying when I contemplate revelation, tradition says, okay, the 6th of Sivan is coming up tonight, tomorrow. Contemplate this idea of revelation. The first thing it means to me is the human being's ability to absorb the da'at of God. Okay? So again, this is a constant idea in our tradition and every religious tradition. There's something called the da'at or wisdom of God. So what is freedom? Freedom is freedom from the forces within us that make this impossible. Freedom is the forces within us which make it impossible to absorb the da'at of God at the simple level and at higher and higher levels. So we ask ourselves, what prevents us from being able to absorb the da'at of God? Which means, why are we not free? And you'll find, again, in every spiritual religious tradition I've studied, there's a great discussion of why we are not free. What happens inside of us where we cannot absorb the da'at of God. And what do you imagine is the place where every tradition starts, the greatest impediment to absorbing the da'at of God? What is it? Anger. Anger and hatred. Anger and hatred is always the starting place. Because anger is what you might call prejudged. Prejudice, prejudged. Anger is, remember, anger happens in a quarter of a second. Something happens, stimulus is anger, hostility, rage, hatred. Happens in a quarter of a second. There's no processing in the higher self. You arrive at a judgment, which means it has been prejudged. That's what we mean by prejudice. Anger always makes us prejudicial because we start with the conclusion. We never actually take the time to work our way through something, which is, as you know from my teaching, is my greatest sadness about our common political life. It has any stake in encouraging people to think. Everybody has a stake in making people feel through rhetoric and arriving at hatred. That's how fear. All political parties want you to start with hatred and fear. Every single one of them. They don't want you to think. They want you to bypass thinking, arrive at a conclusion that you are rhetorically persuaded to arrive at. Now, I'm not saying that the platform of one party or another is right or wrong. That's not what I'm saying. There might be great truth in the platform of one party or another. I'm talking about the process of persuading you to vote one way or another is almost always fear and hatred. Almost always fear and hatred. And that's my great sadness. I can't imagine any political party going the high road and saying, we're not going to tell you to be afraid of anybody. We're not going to put anybody down. We're not going to be mad at anybody. We're going to explain our platform in a rational way. Please vote for us. That will never, ever happen. Okay? Will never happen. Right? Which is my great sadness. So who has to do that? From this perspective, right? Revelation has to do that. This idea that first I want to be free from everything getting in the way of my absorbing the knowledge of the divine. So I'm going to get rid of hatred, of hostility, of fear, of rage, all the kinds of things that stop me from going to my higher self and considering my life internally and with other people, considering it in a rational and reasonable way, meaning going with reality. What's the evidence? What is the world really like? What am I really like? What are people really like? What the human condition is? And what produces the most good in a given case? That's, for me, the core of wisdom. What am I really like? What's this other person really like? Where are we in the process of things? What is human nature? What is the good? How do I get it right here? The wisest, most efficient way to create as much goodness as possible in this short, oftentimes tragic thing we call life.
Sim, shalom, sim, 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 shalom, sim, 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 shalom, tova uvavacha. Sim, 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 shalom, sim, 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 shalom, sim, 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 shalom tova u'veracha. Ay 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 ay